Welcome to Wild West Chronicle, your front row seat to the untamed lands, where legends are born and stories of courage, betrayal, and adventure ride with the wind. From dusty trails to hidden towns, from outlaws to heroes, every tale carries the spirit of the West. Strap in, keep your eyes sharp, and let the journey unfold. The smoke alarm screamed to the ranch house like a wounded animal, and Cade Brennan knew before he even reached the kitchen that he'd failed again. Black smoke poured from the oven where what was supposed to be breakfast biscuits had transformed into charcoal lumps that looked like something you'd find in a campfire pit. He grabbed a towel and waved frantically at the detector, while 3 pairs of young eyes watched him from the doorway with expressions that ranged from disappointment to barely concealed amusement. 7-year-old Nessa, 5-year-old Finn, and 3-year-old Ivy, his brother's children, his responsibility for the past 8 months, and a reason he hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight since the day he buried Jacob and Caroline after that terrible wagon accident on the mountain pass. Cade was 32 years old, had broken horses that would have killed lesser men, had survived cattle drives through blizzards and droughts, but he couldn't make a damn biscuit that wouldn't poison children. Uncle Cade burned breakfast again, Finn announced unnecessarily, his voice carrying that particular tone of resignation that children develop when adults repeatedly disappoint them. Nessa, always a practical one, was already heading toward the pantry. "I'll get the bread and jam," she said, her small shoulders square with responsibility no 7-year-old should have to carry. Cade watched her go, his chest tight with shame that had become as familiar as breathing. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Jacob had been the domestic one, the brother who could cook and sew and manage a household while still running a successful horse ranch. Kay had been a wild one, the drifter who only settled at Jacob's place between jobs, the uncle who showed up with candy and stories but never stayed long enough to do the hard work of actually raising children. Now Jacob and Caroline were gone, killed when their wagon wheel broke on a rain-slicked mountain road. And Cade was all these kids had left. The kitchen was a disaster that went beyond burned biscuits. Dishes from 3 days ago still sat in the sink because Cade kept forgetting to wash them until bedtime when he was too exhausted to care. The floor needed sweeping. There was hay tracked in from the barn, mud from yesterday's rain, and what looked like spilled milk that had dried into a sticky patch near the table. The curtains Caroline had sewn with such care hung crooked because Ivy had pulled on them last week, and Cade didn't know how to fix the rod properly. Everything in this house screamed of a man barely holding things together, and Cade knew the neighbors hadn't noticed. He'd seen their pitying looks at church, heard their whispered conversations about whether those children needed to be placed somewhere more suitable, somewhere with a woman's touch and actual food that didn't come from a jar or get delivered by concerned ladies of the church auxiliary. He opened windows to clear the smoke, then turned to face his makeshift family. Nessa had set out bread and jam and was already helping Ivy into her chair, wiping the toddler's face with practiced efficiency. Finn had poured milk, mostly into the cups, some onto the table, and was looking at Cade with an expression that made his heart hurt. It was the look of a child trying to be brave, trying not to cry, trying to pretend that bread and jam was just as good as the hot breakfast their mother used to make. "I'm sorry," Cade said, the words feeling inadequate and overused. He'd said them so many times in the past 8 months. Sorry for burned food. Sorry for forgetting to wash their clothes. Sorry for not knowing how to braid Nessa's hair or help Finn with his reading lessons. Sorry for being a poor substitute for the parents they'd lost. Then came the knock at the door. 3 sharp raps that cut through the morning chaos like a judge's gavel. Cade wiped his hands on his already dirty pants and went to answer it, expecting another church lady with a casserole and thinly veiled judgment. But the woman standing on his porch wasn't from church. She was younger than the usual charity brigade, maybe late 20s, with copper-colored hair pulled back in practical bun, and wearing a simple gray dress that had seen better days but was clean and neatly mended. She carried a basket covered with a checker cloth, and the smell wafting from it made Cade's stomach clench with longing. Fresh bread, real, proper, warm from the oven bread that smelled like everything his kitchen wasn't. Competence, care, and the kind of domestic magic he'd given up trying to conjure. The woman looked up at him with eyes the color of creek water in summer, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Temperance Whitley. I heard you might need some help." Behind him, Cade heard Nessa's small gasp of hope, and he knew in that moment that whatever was about to happen would change everything. Jacob Brennan had always been the better brother. Everyone in Copper Valley knew it, and Cade had never resented it because it was simply true. Where Cade was reckless, Jacob was steady. Where Cade drifted from job to job and town to town, Jacob had built something lasting. A horse ranch that supplied cavalry mounts to 3 different forts and breeding stock to ranchers across the territory. Where Cade lived in bunkhouses and temporary rooms, Jacob had built a real home with his wife Caroline, filled with children's laughter and the smell of baking bread, and all the things that made a place worth coming back to. Cade loved his brother with a fierce, uncomplicated love of someone who knew their own shortcomings and admired someone who transcended them. And Jacob loved him back, never judging, always welcoming, making space for his wild younger brother whenever Cade showed up dusty and broke between adventures. That April evening, Cade had arrived at the ranch after 3 months working a cattle drive to Kansas. He'd made good money, drunk away a fair portion of it in Dodge City, and saved just enough to feel moderately responsible. Jacob and Caroline welcomed him with the warmth they always did. Caroline setting an extra plate at dinner without being asked. Jacob clapping him on the shoulder and immediately launching into stories about the new foals and Nessa's progress with reading and Finn's obsession with becoming a cowboy just like Uncle Cade. The children had swarmed him as always, demanding presents and stories and attention, and Cade had obliged, pulling penny candy from his pockets and exaggerating tales of stampedes and river crossings until even sensible Nessa was wide-eyed with wonder. It was perfect. It was home. Even if it wasn't his home, it was a place he always came back to when the wandering got lonely. After the children were in bed, Cade and Jacob sat on the porch with whiskey and comfortable silence. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by town lights, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Finally, Jacob spoke. "Cade, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer before you give it." His tone was serious in a way that made Cade set down his glass and pay attention. Jacob wasn't prone to drama. If something worried him enough to sound like this, it mattered. "Caroline and I have been talking about the future, about what happens if," he paused, clearly struggled with how to say it, "if something happens to us. We need someone to take care of the kids. Someone family. Someone who'd love them like we do." Cade felt his stomach drop. "Jacob, nothing's gonna happen to you. You're only 35. You're healthy as a damn horse." Jacob shook his head. "Life's uncertain, little brother. You know that better than most with all the dangerous work you do. But out here, anything can happen. Disease, accidents, raiders. Caroline and I want to know the kids will be looked after. We got it written in our wills. If something happens to both of us, guardianship goes to you." He looked at Cade seriously. "But I'm not going to force that on you. If you don't think you can do it, if you don't want that responsibility, tell me now. We'll make other arrangements. No judgment. But I need to know if you're willing." Cade had laughed, uncomfortable with the whole conversation. "Nothing's going to happen," he'd repeated. "But yeah, if the impossible occurs and you two get struck by lightning or something equally unlikely, I'll take care of your kids. Of course I will. They're family." Jacob had smiled with relief and refilled their glasses, and they toasted to long lives and raised voices about nothing important. For days later, Jacob and Caroline loaded up the wagon to visit Caroline's sister in Silver Ridge, a day's journey through mountain passes. They left the children with neighbors, planning to return in 3 days. But the spring rains had made the roads treacherous, loosening stones and turning packed earth into slippery mud. On a narrow stretch where the road hugged a cliff face, their wagon wheel hit a washed-out section, and the whole rig went over. Witnesses said Jacob tried to jump clear while pushing Caroline to safety, but they both fell, tumbling down the rocky slope with the wagon crashing after them. They died instantly, together, their bodies found still reaching for each other. Cade got the telegram while working a ranch near Tucson, and he dropped everything, riding hard for 2 days straight to get back to Copper Valley. He'd arrived just in time to stand at their gravesides, holding 3 sobbing children who kept asking when Mama and Papa were coming home. That had been 8 months ago. 8 months of trying to figure out how to be a father, when he'd never planned on being more than a fun uncle. 8 months of learning that children needed more than candy and stories. They needed routine and clean clothes and help with schoolwork, and someone who could cook something other than beans and burnt biscuits. 8 months of watching Nessa grow too serious too fast. Finn would draw into quiet sadness, and little Ivy cry for her mama in the middle of the night, while Cade held her helplessly, not knowing the right words or songs or comfort. The ranch ran itself mostly. Jacob had hired good hands who knew their jobs, but the house, the children, the daily domestic chaos of raising a family, that was drowning Cade faster than any river he'd ever crossed. And now this woman, Temperance Whitley, stood on his porch with bread that smelled like salvation, and Cade found himself hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, she was a lifeline he desperately needed. Temperance Whitley stood on Cade Brennan's porch and took in the scene before her, with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen desperation before and knew how to read it. The man in the doorway was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who wasn't sleeping enough or eating right. His clothes were clean but wrinkled. His face showed several days of stubble, and there was what looked like soot on his left sleeve. Behind him, she could see 3 small faces peering out. The children she'd heard about from Mrs. Henderson at the general store, who'd spent 15 minutes detailing the tragedy of the Brennan family, and how that poor bachelor was trying his best, but clearly failing to give those children what they needed. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned it while Temperance was buying flour, and something in the story had hooked itself into her heart and wouldn't let go. Miss Whitley, Cade said slowly, clearly trying to place her and coming up empty. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." His voice carried the rasp of someone who'd been up too early and probably gone to bed too late. Temperance smiled gently. "We haven't. I'm new to Copper Valley. Arrived about 2 weeks ago. I'm boarding with Mrs. Henderson while I look for work." She lifted the basket slightly. "I heard you might need help with the children, and I wanted to offer my services. I have experience as a governess and housekeeper. I can cook, clean, teach, and help with general household management." She kept her voice professional, matter-of-fact, giving him space to accept or refuse without embarrassment. She learned in her years of domestic work that men often struggle with asking for help, especially when it came to things they felt they should be able to handle themselves. Cade stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him processing the offer, suspicion and hope warring in his expression. "Mrs. Henderson sent you?" There was an edge to his voice now, pride bristling at the implication that he couldn't manage his own household. Temperance shook her head quickly. "No, Mrs. Henderson mentioned the situation, but she didn't send me. I came on my own because I need work and you need help." It seemed like a practical arrangement. She paused, then added quietly, "I know what it's like to suddenly have responsibility thrust on you without preparation or support. I know what it's like to feel like you're failing children who depend on you. And I know that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." Behind Kay, the oldest girl, Nessa, Temperance remembered, stepped forward. "Is that bread in your basket?" Her voice was cautious but hopeful, and Temperance's heart squeezed at the longing in it. "It is," Temperance confirmed. "I baked it this morning. Thought maybe you all could use some real breakfast." She looked past Cade to the children. "Would you like some? I made plenty." Nessa looked up at her uncle, silently pleading, and Temperance saw the exact moment Cade's resistance crumbled. He stepped back, gesturing her inside. "Come in," he said quietly. "Please." As Temperance entered the house, she took in the details. The smoke-filled kitchen with burned remains in the oven, the stack of unwashed dishes, the general disarray of a household running on fumes. But she also saw the toys carefully arranged in a corner, the children's drawings pinned to the wall, the family photographs and frames that had been dusted recently. This was a man trying his best and falling short, not a man who didn't care. She set the basket on the table and pulled back the cloth, revealing 2 loaves of golden bread, still warm from the oven. The children's eyes went wide, and without being asked, Nessa went to get plates and a knife. Temperance cut thick slices, buttered them from a small container she brought, and watched as the children tore into bread like they hadn't had a proper meal in days, which, judging by the state of things, they probably hadn't. Cade stood off to the side, watching with an expression that mixed gratitude with shame. "I'm not good at this," he said finally, gesturing vaguely at the kitchen. I thought I could figure it out. Thought being good with horses and cattle would translate somehow, but it doesn't. They need, he trailed off, not able to finish. They need consistency in care. Temperance finished gently. Things that are hard to provide when you're also trying to run a ranch and process grief and figure out how to parent 3 children all at once. There's no shame in needing help, Mr. Brennan. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw him taking her worn but clean dress, her capable hands, her direct gaze that promised competence without judgment. What are you asking for? He said bluntly. In terms of wages? Temperance had thought about this. She needed money desperately, but she also needed security and a place to belong after months of drifting since her last position ended. Room and board plus $20 a month, she said. I'll handle all domestic duties, cooking, cleaning, laundry, teaching the children their lessons. I'll maintain the household so you can focus on the ranch. I'll start tomorrow if you're agreeable. $20 was less than she could probably command, but something about the situation called to her in a way she didn't fully understand yet. These children needed her, and maybe, she admitted privately, she needed them too. Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. You're hired, Miss Whitley. And thank you for the bread. And for... He gestured helplessly at the children, who were now fighting over the last piece. For seeing we needed help instead of just judging us for it. Temperance shook his hand firmly, and as their palms met, she felt something shift. The beginning of something that would change all their lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. Temperance arrived the next morning with 2 bags containing everything she owned, which wasn't much. 3 dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible, and a small collection of books she'd accumulated over years of working in various households. It had been 7 years since she'd left her family's failing farm in Ohio to seek work as a domestic, and she'd learned to travel light, because positions rarely lasted and attachments only made leaving harder. But something about the Brennan Ranch felt different already. Maybe it was the way Nessa had hugged her briefly but fiercely before bed last night. Maybe it was the desperate hope in Cade's eyes when he'd accepted her offer. Or maybe it was simply that Temperance was tired of drifting and ready to find somewhere she could stay. Cade showed her to a small room off the kitchen that had clearly been a storage space until recently. He'd moved boxes out and brought in a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. It's not much, he said apologetically. The main bedrooms upstairs are the children's rooms and mine. Jacob and Caroline's room is, he paused, pain flashing across his face. I haven't been able to go in there yet. Can't bring myself to move their things. Temperance nodded understanding. This room is perfect, she assured him. Private and close to the kitchen, so I can start breakfast early without disturbing anyone. She set her bags down and turned to face him. Before we begin, I need to understand the situation fully. Tell me about the children, their routines, their temperaments, what they're struggling with most. And tell me about the ranch operations so I know when you'll be around and when you'll need meals prepared. They sat at the kitchen table. After Temperance cleared the dishes and wiped down surfaces with efficient practice movements. And Cade talked. He told her about Nessa, who'd been 7 when her parents died and had tried to take over all of Caroline's duties despite being far too young. About how she mothered her siblings fiercely and rarely cried where anyone could see her. He told her about Finn, who'd been talkative and energetic before the accident but had gone quiet and withdrawn after, spending hours staring at nothing with tears he wouldn't let fall. About Ivy, barely 3 years old, who still asked for her mama every day and didn't fully understand why her parents weren't coming back. About the nightmares all 3 had, the bedwetting Ivy had started, the way Finn sometimes hid under the porch and wouldn't come out, the pressure Nessa put on herself to be perfect and helpful and grown-up when she was still just a child herself. Then Cade talked about himself, his failures and inadequacies, his total lack of preparation for fatherhood, the way he'd always been the uncle who provided fun, but never responsibility. I don't know how to braid hair, he said, his voice rough with frustration. Caroline always did Nessa's hair so pretty, these intricate braids and ribbons. And now Nessa just wears it loose or in a messy ponytail, because I don't know how. And Finn needs help with reading, but I don't have the patience to sit still and work through primers when there's so much ranch work to do. And Ivy, his voice broke. Ivy's only 3. She needs things I don't know how to give, comfort and routine, and someone who knows how to sing the right songs and make the hurt better. I'm failing them. Every day, I'm failing them. Temperance reached across the table and placed her hand briefly over his, a gesture of comfort but not familiarity, letting him know he wasn't alone anymore. You're not failing them, she said firmly. You're keeping them fed and housed and safe, which is more than many orphans get. You're trying, which matters more than you know. But you can't do everything alone, and you shouldn't have to. That's why I'm here. She pulled her hand back and straightened her shoulders. Starting today, this household runs on schedule. The children need routine, same bedtime every night, same meal times, same expectations. I'll handle all domestic duties. Your job is the ranch and being present for them when you can. We work together, communicate clearly, and support each other. These children have lost enough. We're going to give them stability. Cade looked at her with something like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe someone had walked into his chaos, and declared it manageable. You're very confident, he said, and there was question in it. Was her confidence warranted or just naivety? Temperance smiled. I've raised children in 5 different households over 7 years, Mr. Brennan. I've dealt with everything from spoiled aristocrat sons to traumatized immigrant children who didn't speak English. I know my capabilities, and I know what these children need. What I don't know yet is the specifics of this household, but I'll learn quickly. She stood and rolled up her sleeves. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to see what supplies we have and start planning meals for the week. You have ranch work to do, I assume? Cade nodded, standing as well. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Temperance saw something other than exhaustion in his eyes. It looked like hope as he headed out to the barn, and she turned to survey the kitchen that would be her domain. Temperance sent up a quick prayer that she could deliver on the confidence she projected. These children and their struggling uncle were counting on her. She couldn't fail them. She wouldn't. The transformation began immediately and was more brutal than anyone expected. Temperance woke at 5 every morning, built the fire, started bread dough rising, and had coffee ready by the time Cade stumbled downstairs at 5:30. Breakfast, real breakfast, not burned offerings or bread and jam desperation, appeared on the table at 6:30 sharp. She woke the children at 6, helped them dress and wash, and had them at the table promptly, teaching them through her actions that meals happen on schedule whether they were ready or not. The first morning, Finn complained he wasn't hungry. Temperance simply said, "That's fine. Lunch is at noon. Nothing before then." By 9 o'clock, Finn was regretting his rebellion, and by noon he ate everything on his plate without protest. She was teaching them that her rules weren't negotiable, but also that her word was reliable. If she said lunch at noon, lunch happened at noon. If she said bedtime at 8, lights went out at 8, in a world that had betrayed them through their parents' sudden death. This predictability was medicine they desperately needed even if they didn't know it yet. The house itself underwent a similar transformation. Temperance attacked the accumulated chaos with systematic efficiency. Dishes washed and put away, floors swept and mopped, laundry done and folded, surfaces cleared and dusted. She enlisted the children's help in age-appropriate ways. Nessa helped with dishes and setting the table. Finn was responsible for feeding the chickens and gathering eggs. Even little Ivy had tasks like putting away her toys before bed. Temperance made it clear that everyone in the household contributed because that's how families worked. But she also made it gentle, praising effort over perfection, making tasks into games when possible, never shaming mistakes. When Finn accidentally broke a plate his second day helping with dishes, Temperance simply said, "Accidents happen. Let's sweep it up carefully so nobody gets cut." No anger, no lecture, just practical problem solving. Finn had stared at her with wide eyes, clearly expecting punishment. And when none came, something in his tense shoulders relaxed slightly. Cade watched all of this with a mixture of relief and something that looked almost like grief. On the third evening, after the children were in bed, he found Temperance in the kitchen preparing tomorrow's bread dough. "You make it look easy," he said quietly. "Everything I struggled with for months, you just handle." There was no accusation in his voice, but Temperance heard the self-recrimination underneath. She looked up from kneading dough, her hands dusted with flour. "It's not easy," she corrected gently. "It's familiar. I've been doing this work for 7 years across multiple households." "You've been doing ranch work for how long?" Cade shrugged. "Since I was 12. 20 years. Temperance nodded. "And I bet you make that look easy to someone who's never broken a horse or mended a fence or delivered a calf. We all have our skills, Mr. Brennan. Mine just happened to be the ones this household needed." He moved closer, leaning against the counter, and Temperance was suddenly very aware of him. The breadth of his shoulders, the calluses on his hands, the smell of leather and horse and open air that clung to him. "The children are already different," he said, wonder in his voice. "Nessa smiled yesterday. Actually smiled, not just going through the motions. And Finn asked me about the new foals instead of just staring silently. And Ivy," he paused, his voice thickening. "Ivy called me Papa Cade yesterday. First time she's used that name since Jacob died. She's been calling me uncle like I'm still just visiting." Temperance felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Children are resilient when they feel safe," she said softly. "You've kept them safe. I'm just providing structure. Together, we're giving them what they need to heal." The word "together" hung in the air between them, carrying weight neither of them was quite ready to examine. Cade cleared his throat and stepped back. "Well, thank you for everything. I know I say it a lot, but I mean it. You've given me my life back, given them their childhood back." Temperance finished shaping the dough and covered it with a cloth to rise overnight. "You're welcome. Now go to bed, Mr. Brennan. You look exhausted." He laughed shortly. "I'm sleeping better now that I'm not worried about burning the house down or poisoning the children. But yeah, early morning comes quick." He headed toward the stairs, then paused. "Miss Whitley, tomorrow evening, after the children are in bed, could we talk? About Jacob and Caroline. About what they were like. I think the children need to hear stories about them. But I don't know how to start those conversations without making everyone cry." Temperance nodded. "Of course. We'll figure out together." There was that word again, together, as Cade disappeared upstairs and Temperance finished her kitchen tasks. She wondered what exactly she walked into. She'd expected to find work. She'd expected to help struggling children. But she hadn't expected to feel this sense of belonging, of purpose, of being exactly where she was meant to be. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, and as she finally retreated to her small room and lay down on her narrow bed, Temperance admitted to herself that she was already getting attached to the children who needed her, to the house that was becoming home, and to the man who looked at her like she'd save his life when really she suspected they might be saving each other. A week into Temperance's arrival, she and Cade established a new evening routine. After the children were in bed, stories read, prayers said, nightmare prevention rituals completed, they'd sit in the small parlor with coffee and talk. Not small talk or logistics, but real conversation about Jacob and Caroline, about building a memory foundation these children could carry into their future. Cade brought down a wooden box filled with photographs and mementos, and together they sorted through the pieces of lives cut too short. There was Jacob and Caroline's wedding photo. Jacob tall and proud in his Sunday suit. Caroline beautiful in a simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair. There were baby photos of all three children, family portraits taken at various stages, candid shots that captured moments of joy in ordinary life that now felt extraordinary because they were gone. "Tell me about how they met," Temperance prompted, and Cade's face softened with memory. Jacob was 22, working his first solo horse sale at a fair in Silver Ridge. Caroline was 17, there with her family. She was looking at the horses, and Jacob started explaining bloodlines and training techniques, showing off like young men do. But Caroline wasn't impressed by his knowledge. She was impressed by how gentle he was with a nervous filly that kept shying from potential buyers. She told him later that any man who could be that patient and kind with an animal would be the same with people. She was right. Cade smiled. They were married within 6 months. Her parents thought she was too young, but Caroline was stubborn when she knew what she wanted, and what she wanted with Jacob. The love in his voice made Temperance's chest ache with vicarious grief for people she'd never met, but was coming to know through stories. And the ranch? Temperance asked, how did they build all this? Cade gestured toward the windows, beyond which the horse ranch spread across good grazing land. Jacob started with nothing, just his knowledge and work ethic. He worked for other ranchers for 5 years, saved every penny, learned everything he could. Caroline worked too, sewing, taking in laundry, whatever brought in money. When they'd saved enough, they bought this land and started breeding horses. It was hard those first years. I'd come help when I could between my own jobs. But Jacob had this vision, and Caroline had absolute faith in him. They built it together, piece by piece. By the time Nessa was born, they were turning a real profit. By the time Finn came along, they were successful enough to hire hands and expand. They'd finally made it. His voice broke, and then a damn wagon wheel on a mountain pass took it all away. Temperance let him sit with his grief for a moment before asking the question she'd been building toward. Mr. Brennan, the children need to hear these stories. They need to know their parents as real people with dreams and flaws and love stories. But they also need permission to remember, without it always ending in tears. What if we made a ritual? Sunday evenings, after dinner, we all sit together and share one story about Jacob or Caroline. Something happy or funny or meaningful. We keep their memory alive without making it a shrine. She'd done this before with other grieving families and seen how it helped. Transforming parents from perfect angels lost forever into real people whose memory could comfort rather than only wound. Cade looked at her with something like, "Aw, you're good at this," he said quietly. Not just the cooking and cleaning, but the emotional work. Understanding what they need before they know they need it. Temperance felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment. "I've worked with many children," she said, deflecting. "You learn to read underneath what they say to what they mean." But Cade shook his head. "It's more than that. You care, really care, not just doing a job, but..." He struggled for words. "But making this your mission, making them your priority. Why?" The question was direct, almost challenging, and Temperance knew her answer would matter. She thought about deflecting again, maintaining professional distance. But something in Cade's eyes, genuine curiosity mixed with growing trust, made her tell the truth. "Because I was them once," she said quietly, setting down her coffee cup. "Not exactly. My parents didn't die, but they might as well have for all the attention they paid me. I was the oldest of 6 children on a failing farm. My mother was overwhelmed. My father was drowning in debt and bitterness. By the time I was 8, I was raising my siblings, running a household, carrying weight no child should carry. When I was 15, I left, took a position as a mother's helper with a family heading west, sent money back when I could, and never looked back. I've been working other people's houses, raising other people's children ever since." She met his eyes. "So when I see children who've lost parents, who are scared and grieving and try and be braver than they should have to be, I see myself. And I want to give them what nobody gave me. Someone who shows up, who stays, who makes life safe again." The vulnerability of the admission made her feel exposed, but also lighter, like telling truth lifted weight she'd been carrying too long. Cade was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I'm glad you're here, Miss Whitley. These children are lucky to have you. And so am I." The way he said it, simple and sincere, made Temperance's heart do something complicated in her chest. She stood quickly, needing to move, to break the intensity of the moment. "We should both get some rest," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Tomorrow's Sunday. If you're agreeable, we'll start the new tradition after dinner. One story about Jacob and Caroline, told together, kept alive through love." Cade stood as well, and in the lamplight, his face showed gratitude and something else, something that made Temperance's breath catch. "Tomorrow then," he agreed. As Temperance retreated to her small room, she pressed her hand against her racing heart and reminded herself firmly that she was here for the children, not for the man raising them. But her treacherous heart was beginning to suspect it might not be that simple. That Sunday after dinner, Cade gathered everyone in the parlor with its comfortable chairs and warm firelight. Temperance had baked apple pie. Caroline's recipe that she found carefully written in a kitchen journal, and they each had a slice while settling into their new ritual. Nessa sat curled next to Temperance on the settee, Finn on the floor near Cade's chair, and Ivy on Cade's lap, her thumb in her mouth despite Temperance's gentle efforts to break the habit. The scene felt almost unbearably domestic, like a real family instead of the cobbled-together unit they actually were. Cade cleared his throat, suddenly nervous about starting this tradition that could either heal or harm. "Kids," Miss Temperance, "and I thought it would be good if we spent a little time every Sunday evening talking about your mama and papa. Not to be sad, but to remember the good things, to keep their stories alive." He paused, watching their reactions carefully. Nessa's eyes had gone wide and wary. Finn had tensed, and Ivy had pressed her face into Cade's chest. "I'll start," Temperance said gently, drawing their attention. "I never met your parents, but I found something this week that taught me about them." She pulled out Caroline's kitchen journal, its pages stained with flour and grease from years of use. Your mama wrote down all her recipes, but she also wrote little notes beside them. "Look, here by the apple pie recipe," she wrote Jacob's favorite. "He always tries to sneak a piece before dinner when he thinks I'm not looking." She smiled at the children. "And here by the biscuit recipe," she wrote, "Nessa helped me make these today. She's getting so good at kneading the dough. So proud of my girl." And this one by the sugar cookies. "Finn ate 3 before I could get them on the plate. That boy is going to be tall like his papa. Your mama loved you so much that even her recipes are love letters." Nessa reached for the journal with trembling hands, and Temperance let her take it, watching as the girl traced her mother's handwriting with one finger. "I remember helping make biscuits," Nessa whispered. "Mama would let me punch down the dough, and I pretend I was boxing like Papa taught me." A smile flickered across her face, small but genuine. Finn scooted closer. "Are there more stories in there? About us?" Temperance nodded. "Lots. And I thought maybe every week we could cook something from your mama's recipes together, and I'll tell you what she wrote about it. We'll taste her love in the food and remember her that way." It was manipulative, perhaps, using food as memory, but Temperance knew that sensory connections were powerful. Taste and smell could unlock grief and joy in equal measure, and these children needed both. Cade squeezed Ivy gently to get her attention. "My turn," he said. "Let me tell you about the time your papa tried to teach me to cook, back before he met your mama. I was maybe 20, home between jobs, and Jacob decided I needed to know how to make something other than campfire beans. He taught me to make stew, step by step, being all patient like he was with the horses. I thought I was doing great, but when we sat down to eat, it was so salty we could barely swallow it." He shook his head with affection. "I'd mixed up the salt and sugar containers. Your papa ate 2 whole bowls anyway, just to make me feel better, even though I could see his eyes watering from the salt. That was Jacob. He'd rather suffer himself than hurt someone's feelings. He was the kindest man I've ever known." Finn spoke up suddenly, his voice small but determined. "Papa used to let me help with the horses, even though Mama said I was too little. He'd lift me up so I could brush their necks, and he'd tell me I was a natural horseman just like him." The boy's eyes were wet, but he smiled through the tears. "And Mama would make us wash our hands 3 times before dinner because we'd smell like horses, and she'd pretend to be mad, but she was really laughing." The memory seemed to release something in Finn, and suddenly he was talking faster. "And Papa would chase us around the yard and pretend to be a horse himself, and Mama would watch from the porch and call us her wild herd." And his voice broke and the tears came in earnest now, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that needed to flow. Temperance moved smoothly to the floor beside Finn and pulled him into a hug, letting him sob against her shoulder. Cade held Ivy tighter as the toddler began crying too, confused by her brother's tears but caught up in the emotion. Nessa stayed on the settee, the journal clutched to her chest, her own silent tears streaming down her face. For several minutes, they simply sat with their grief, not fighting it or hiding it, but letting it exist in the space between them. Temperance stroked Finn's hair and made soft, soothing sounds, while Cade rocked Ivy and murmured comfort. This was what they'd needed all along. Permission to remember, permission to grieve, permission to cry without feeling like they were failing to be brave. Finally, the storm passed, and Finn pulled back from Temperance, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I miss them," he said unnecessarily. "I miss them so much." "I know, sweetheart," Temperance said gently. "We all do. But you know what? Crying about it doesn't mean you're weak. It means you love them. And that love doesn't go away just because they did. That love lives in here." She touched his chest, and in the stories we tell and the recipes we cook in the way Uncle Cade is raising you be good and kind just like your papa was. She looked around at all of them. Your parents can't be here anymore, but their love still is. In this house they built, in the ranch they created, in you three beautiful children they raised. And every Sunday, we're going to remember that love and let it fill us up instead of letting the sadness empty us out. Does that sound good? Three heads nodded, and even through their tears, Temperance saw something like relief in their faces. This tradition would be hard, but it would also be healing. They'd stumbled on something important here. A way to honor the dead while living for the future. A way to grieve without drowning. A way to move forward without forgetting. As Cade carried a sleepy Ivy upstairs and Temperance guided Nessa and Finn to their rooms, she felt the rightness of his household settling more deeply into her bones. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. And as she passed Cade on the stairs, their eyes met briefly, and in that glance was understanding and gratitude, and something else neither of them was quite ready to name. But it was there, growing quietly like seeds planted in good soil, waiting for the right time to break through into light. 2 weeks into the Sunday tradition, Temperance decided it was time to include the children more actively in the kitchen work. On a Saturday afternoon when Cade was out checking fence lines, she called all 3 children to the kitchen table and announced they were going to make Caroline's famous cinnamon rolls together. Nessa's face lit up immediately. She remembered helping her mother with these. But Finn looked skeptical and Ivy just wanted to play with the flour. Temperance had learned in her years of childcare that the best way to teach was through doing, and the best way to heal was through creating something with your own hands. So she positioned Nessa on a chair to reach the counter comfortably, gave Finn a wooden spoon for mixing, and let Ivy help by playing with a small ball of dough at the end of the table where she couldn't cause too much chaos. Your mama's notes say she made these every Saturday morning. Temperance explained as she measured out flour and showed Nessa how to crack eggs into the bowl without getting shells everywhere. She said Saturday cinnamon rolls were your papa's favorite way to start the weekend. He'd eat 3 and complain about how his pants were getting tight, but he never stopped eating them. Nessa giggled, and the sound was so unexpected and joyful that Temperance felt tears prick her eyes. This child who'd been too serious for too long was remembering how to be 7 years old again. Finn mixed the dough with intense concentration, his tongue poking out between his teeth the way his father's apparently had when Jacob was focused on something detailed. The similarities between Finn and Jacob were striking once you knew what to look for. The same stubborn set of the jaw, the same careful way of approaching new tasks, the same need to do things right the first time. As they worked, Temperance told them stories from the kitchen journal, bringing Caroline to life through her own written words. Here's what your mama wrote about teaching Nessa to braid bread dough. "My girl has such patient hands. She'll be a better baker than me someday." Nessa beamed with pride at this praise from beyond the grave. And here, about Finn, caught him feeding half his breakfast to the barn cats again. That boy has his papa's soft heart for animals. Finn looked pleased rather than caught, happy to be seen as like his father in any way. Even little Ivy got mentioned. "My baby girl tried to help wash dishes today. Got more water on the floor than in the sink, but her enthusiasm makes up for the mess. She's going to be a handful when she grows up, smart and stubborn like both her parents." The dough rose while they cleaned up flour dust, and Temperance taught them how to leave a kitchen better than they found it, one of her cardinal rules. When it was time to roll out the dough and add cinnamon sugar, Nessa showed Finn how their mother had taught her to spread the mixture evenly. Finn tried to copy her technique, his small hands clumsy but earnest. They rolled the dough into a log together, Temperance guiding but letting them do the actual work. And when it came time to slice into rolls, she held the knife with Nessa and let the girl feel the satisfaction of cutting clean spirals. Ivy helped arrange them in the pan. though help mostly meant moving them around randomly until Temperance gently corrected their positions. The whole process took twice as long as if Temperance had done it herself. But the joy on the children's faces made every extra minute worthwhile, while the rolls baked, filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and yeast and sugar. They sat at the table with milk and talked. "Do you think Mama will be proud of us?" Nessa asked suddenly, her voice small and uncertain. "For making her recipe?" Temperance reached across the table and took the girl's hand. "I think your mama will be bursting with pride," she said firmly. "Not just because you made her recipe, but because you're being brave every single day. Because you're taking care of your brothers and helping around the house and still getting your schoolwork done. Because you're healing even though healing is hard work." She looked at each child in turn. "Your parents would be so proud of all three of you, and they'd be grateful that you have each other and that you're letting people help you through this hard time." Finn spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "Miss Temperance, will you stay forever? Or will you leave like Mama and Papa did?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the fear of more abandonment, and Temperance felt her heart squeeze painfully. This was a question she'd been dreading, because the honest answer was that she didn't know. Positions ended. Families moved on. She was an employee, not family, no matter how attached she was becoming. But looking at Finn's anxious face and Nessa's hopeful eyes and Ivy's innocent trust, Temperance made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Not unless you want me to leave. I'm staying right here, taking care of you for as long as you need me. That's a promise." As if summoned by the smell of baking, or perhaps by something deeper, Cade appeared in the doorway just as Temperance pulled the golden rolls from the oven. He'd come back from his fence work early, drawn home by something he couldn't name, and now he stood frozen at the sight before him. His kitchen filled with laughter and flour dust, his niece and nephews covered in dough and happiness, and Temperance in the center of it all like she'd always been there, like she'd always belonged. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. Recognition maybe, or possibility, or the terrifying, wonderful knowledge that this makeshift family was becoming real. "Those smell like Caroline cinnamon rolls," Cade said, his voice rough with emotion. Nessa jumped up excitedly. "We made them, Uncle Cade. Miss Temperance taught us Mama's recipe." And as the children pulled him to the table to try their creation, as Temperance cut warm rolls and passed them around, as they all sat together in the late afternoon light, tasting sweetness and memory and hope, both adults silently acknowledged that something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just employer and employee anymore, or guardian and governess, or even just two adults raising children together. They were becoming something more, something neither of them had planned, but both were beginning to want with intensity that couldn't be ignored much longer. The spring storm rolled in on a Tuesday evening, dark clouds piling up over the mountains like bruises spreading across the sky. Temperance had been watching the weather all day, that instinct developed from years of frontier living telling her this would be bad. She'd made sure the children were inside by 4, had dinner ready early, and had candles and lanterns prepared in case the winds knocked out power. Cade came in from the barn soaked and worried, reporting that the horses were spooked and the cattle were moving restless in the far pasture. "I need to go back out," he said, already turning toward the door. "Make sure everything's secured. Get the animals into shelter. Could be hours." Temperance nodded, understanding but not liking it. "Be careful," she said, and concern in her voice made him pause and look at her. Really look at her, before nodding and disappearing back into the storm. The wind hit first, rattling windows and tearing at the roof shingles with fingers of air that sounded almost alive. Then came the rain, sheets of it driven horizontal by the gale, turned the world outside the windows into a gray blur. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the house, and Ivy started crying immediately. The sound of it triggering memories of the storm that had made the road slippery, that had loosened the earth, that had sent her parents' wagon over the cliff. Finn went pale and quiet, his eyes too wide, his breathing too fast. Nessa tried to be brave, but Temperance could see her hands shaking as she held Ivy. "Into the parlor," Temperance commanded, her voice calm and firm despite her own growing fear. "Away from the windows. We're going to be fine, but we're going to be smart about it." She gathered the children into the interior parlor, where the windows were smallest and the walls were thickest. She lit every candle and lamp she could find, creating a warm glow that pushed back the darkness. She pulled out blankets and made a nest on the floor, then distracted them with a story. Not a written one, but one she made up on the spot about 3 brave children who survived a magical storm and found treasure on the other side. Her voice was steady and soothing, wrapping around them like the blankets, giving them something to focus on besides the screaming wind and crashing thunder. Ivy eventually stopped crying and fell asleep with her head in Temperance's lap. Finn pressed close against her side. Nessa sat rigid and alert, clearly trying to be the grown-up. But when Temperance opened her arm in invitation, the girl collapsed against her and finally let herself be small and scared. And 7 hours passed. The storm grew worse, wind howling like something hungry trying to get inside. At one point, there was a tremendous crash from outside, something large hitting something else, and all 3 children jerked awake crying. Temperance held them tight and kept her voice calm. "It's all right. We're safe inside. The house is strong. Your papa built it well. Nothing's going to hurt you while I'm here." She sang then, old hymns her mother had sung, songs about shelter and safety and God's protection. She didn't know if she believed all the words, but she believed in the power of voice to calm fear. And slowly, so slowly, the children relaxed again. But Temperance's mind was racing, terrified about Cade out in this storm. What if a tree fell? What if lightning struck? What if he was hurt and alone, and she had no way to help him? Finally, near midnight, the door crashed open and Cade stumbled inside, drenched and shaking and bleeding from a cut above his eye. Temperance's heart leaped into her throat. She carefully disentangled herself from the sleeping children and rushed to him. What happened? He was breathing hard, clearly exhausted. Tree came down across the barn roof. Missed the horses, but I had to move fast to get them out. Caught a falling branch. He gestured vaguely at his face. The cut was bleeding steadily, and Temperance could see his hands were scraped raw. "Sit," she commanded, pushing him into a chair. She grabbed clean cloths and water, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "This needs stitches. Can you ride to Doc Morrison's?" Cade shook his head. "Roads will be impassable now. Creeks will have flooded. I'll be fine." He wasn't fine. The cut was deep, and he was clearly in shock, his body shaking from cold and adrenaline crash. Temperance made a decision. "I can stitch it. I've done field medicine before. Farm accidents, ranch injuries. It won't be pretty, but it'll hold." Cade looked at her with surprise and something like admiration. "You never stop surprising me," he said, his voice rough. She cleaned the wound carefully, her touch gentle despite the necessity of causing more pain. Cade hissed between his teeth, but didn't pull away as she threaded the needle. Steady hands despite her fear. She said quietly, "I was terrified you wouldn't come back, that something would happen to you, and I'd have to tell those children they'd lost someone else." Her voice broke on the last word, revealing more than she intended. Cade reached up and caught her wrist, stopping her motion. "I'm here," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm all right. I came back." The way he said it, "I came back," not to the house but to her, made Temperance's breath catch. They stayed frozen like that for a long moment. The storm raging outside, the children sleeping in the next room, and between them a connection that had been building for weeks, finally crystallizing into something undeniable. Then Temperance pulled away and finished stitching the wound with shaking hands, and neither of them spoke about the moment or what it meant, but both knew that something irreversible had happened. The storm outside would pass. The storm inside them was just beginning. Dawn broke over a transformed landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind debris and damage, but also that particular clarity that comes after violence. Air washed clean, colors vivid, the world somehow more real than before. Temperance woke on the parlor floor surrounded by sleeping children, her back aching from the awkward position, but her heart full of gratitude that they were all safe. She carefully extracted herself and went to the kitchen to assess the situation. Cade was already there, despite his injury, making coffee with clumsy movements because his hands were bandaged. He turned when she entered, and the look that passed between them acknowledged last night's moment without discussing it. Some things were too new and fragile to examine in daylight yet. How bad is the damage? Temperance asked, moving to take over the coffee making, because Cade was clearly struggling. He stepped back and let her, which felt significant. This man who'd been doing everything alone for so long learning to accept help. Barn roof needs major repairs. Couple of fence sections down. Lost some chickens. Coop roof collapsed. But the horses are fine. Cattle are fine. House is intact. Could have been worse. He touched the stitches on his forehead gingerly. How's my face look? Still pretty enough to frighten small children. The attempt at humor made Temperance smile despite everything. You'll have a scar, but it gives you character. She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed him one, their fingers brushing in exchange. That small touch sent electricity up her arm, and from the way Cade's eyes widened, he felt it too. They sat at the kitchen table in the early morning quiet, both exhausted but neither quite ready to sleep. Last night, Cade started, then stopped, clearly unsure how to continue. Temperance waited, her heart hammering. Last night made me realize something, he said finally. These past weeks with you here, it's not just that the house runs better or the children are happier or I'm getting more sleep. He struggled for words. It's that this feels like a real family now. Not just me fumbling through guardianship, but an actual family with partnership and support. And he trailed off, looking frustrated with his inability to articulate what he meant. Temperance understood anyway. She felt it too, the shift from practical arrangement to something deeper. The way employer and employee had transformed into something that didn't have a name yet, but felt like coming home. I know what you mean, she said quietly. I've worked in a dozen households, cared for dozens of children, but this is different. This feels like, she paused, searching for the right words. Like I'm not just doing a job, like I'm building something. She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish that sentence. Cade leaned forward, his voice urgent now. Like you belong here? Like this is where you're supposed to be? His eyes were intense, pleading, asking for something she wasn't sure she should give but desperately wanted to. Yes, Temperance admitted, the word barely a whisper. Exactly like that. The confession hung between them, honest and terrifying. They were crossing lines now, moving from professional relationship into territory that was dangerous for so many reasons. The power imbalance of employer and employee, the scandal of an unmarried woman and man living under one roof, the risk of breaking whatever this was if they moved too fast. Before either could say more, small footsteps announced Finn's arrival. The boy looked rumpled and worried, clearly having woken to find the adults gone and gotten scared. Uncle Cade? Miss Temperance? Is the storm over? Are we okay? Cade scooped him up despite his injured hands, and Finn wrapped his arms around his uncle's neck. Storm's over, buddy. We're all safe. Miss Temperance took care of you, and I took care of the animals. And now we're gonna have a big breakfast and then start cleaning up. Sound good? Finn nodded against Cade's shoulder, and Temperance felt her heart squeeze at the sight. This big, tough cowboy being so gentle with a frightened child. This man who thought he couldn't parent learning to do it beautifully through necessity and love. She stood and began pulling out ingredients for pancakes, needing something to do with her hands, needing to not think about the conversation they'd been having and what it meant for their future. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The older children woke, were fed, and helped with age-appropriate cleanup tasks. Neighbors began arriving to check on them and offer help with repairs. The community came together the way frontier communities did after disasters, everyone pitching in, sharing resources, rebuilding what the storm had destroyed. Through it all, Temperance and Cade moved around each other with new awareness, their eyes meeting across rooms, their movements coordinated like they'd been partners for years instead of weeks. And if the neighbors noticed something different in how the Brennan household operated now, how it felt less like a bachelor struggling and more like a real home, they were kind enough not to comment, at least not to their faces. But Temperance caught the speculative looks, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. The town was watching, waiting to see what would happen between the cowboy raising his brother's kids and the governess who'd walked into his life carrying warm bread and competence. Neither Temperance nor Cade knew yet what would happen, but both were beginning to suspect it would be something that changed everything forever. A week after the storm, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the ranch with a basket of mending and a mission. She'd been the one to first mention the Brennan situation to Temperance, but now she arrived with pursed lips and concern in her eyes that wasn't entirely charitable. Temperance welcomed her in because frontier hospitality demanded it, but she recognized the visit for what it was: reconnaissance disguised as neighborly checking in. The older woman accepted tea and made small talk about the storm damage before finally getting to her real purpose. "My dear, I feel it's my Christian duty to mention that people are starting to talk about you living here with Mr. Brennan. Unchaperoned. It's not quite proper, is it?" Her voice dripped with false concern, the kind that masked judgment in worried words. Temperance had been expecting this conversation since she'd taken the position, had prepared her response carefully. "I'm employed as governess and housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson. I have my own separate quarters. The arrangement is purely professional, and the children's welfare is my primary concern." Her voice was steady, polite, giving nothing away. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't satisfied. "Professional or not, dear, it doesn't look right. A young, unmarried woman living with a bachelor. You can see how it appears, can't you? For your reputation, not to mention his. And those poor children, what kind of example does it set?" The implication was clear. Temperance was doing something shameful, something that might corrupt the very children she was trying to help. It made her blood boil, but she kept her face calm. "I see a man trying to honor his brother's dying wish by raising 3 orphan children," Temperance said, her voice still polite but with steel underneath now. "I see children who are suffering from neglect, not malicious neglect, but the inevitable result of one person trying to do the work of 2. I see a household that's now stable, with children who are thriving, eating proper meals, learning their lessons, and healing from tremendous loss. If my presence here is accomplishing all that, I'm not particularly concerned with how it appears to people who'd rather see those children suffer than risk a woman's reputation." The words were sharper than she'd intended, but Temperance was tired of the particular brand of frontier morality that valued appearance over substance, propriety over kindness. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed, caught between offense and grudging respect. "Well, I can see you feel strongly about it. But Miss Whitley, you must understand, if the gossip continues, it could hurt Mr. Brennan's standing in the community, could hurt his business. People might not want to deal with a man who's living in," she paused delicately, "in questionable circumstances." There it was, the real concern, not Temperance's reputation or the children's welfare, but business and standing in what the men of the community might think. Temperance took a slow breath, trying to find patience she didn't entirely feel. "Then perhaps," she said carefully, "the community should concern themselves less with gossip and more with supporting a family that suffered terrible loss. Mr. Brennan is doing his best in an impossible situation. I'm helping him. If people choose to see something improper in that, it says more about their minds and our behavior." Mrs. Henderson left shortly after, unsatisfied but unable to argue further. As Temperance watched her ride away, she felt dread settling in her stomach. She'd known this would come eventually. The questions, the judgment, the implication that a woman and man couldn't work together without something untoward happening. But now the conversation had happened, which meant others were having it too. How long before someone decided to act on their concerns? How long before the children's welfare was used as an excuse to interfere? And worse, how long before the undeniable feelings growing between her and Cade actually did cross the line into impropriety? Because Mrs. Henderson's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Something was happening between them, something that went far beyond professional courtesy or friendly partnership, something that kept Temperance awake at night, wondering what it would feel like to kiss him, to be held by him, to be more than just a hired help. That evening, after the children were in bed, Temperance told Cade about the visit. He listened with a darkening expression, his jaw tight with anger. "Let them talk," he said finally. "I don't give a damn what busybodies think. You're here because those kids need you. Because I need you. Nothing else matters." But Temperance shook her head. "It does matter, Cade. Your business depends on your reputation. If people start refusing to buy horses from you because they think she couldn't finish the sentence, because they think we're improper, You could lose everything Jacob built. I can't let that happen. Cade stood and moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small kitchen. So what are you saying? That you should leave? Go back to boarding with Mrs. Henderson and let those children suffer, because some people have dirty minds. His voice was rough with emotion, anger and fear mixed together. No, Temperance said, standing her ground though her heart was racing at his proximity. I'm saying we need to be more careful. No more evening conversations alone. No more. She gestured vaguely at the space between them, at the crackling awareness that made every interaction charged with possibility. No more letting this become something it can't be. The words hurt to say, but they needed saying. Cade's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked like determination. And what if I wanted to become something? He asked quietly. What if I'm tired of pretending this is just a professional arrangement? What if every day I wake up grateful you're here, and every night I go to bed wishing I had the right to? He stopped, shook his head, stepped back. Never mind. You're right. We need to be more careful. For the children's sake. For the ranch. For your reputation. He left the kitchen quickly, leaving Temperance standing alone with her heart hammering and tears threatening, wondering if doing the right thing always had to hurt this much. 3 days after Mrs. Henderson's visit, Cade rode into town with purpose etched in every line of his body. He went first to the bank, where he withdrew a sum that made the clerk's eyebrows rise. Then he visited the general store, made a purchase that required special ordering, and spoke quietly to proprietor about discretion. His final stop was a church, where he found Reverend Matthews sweeping the steps and asked for a private conversation that lasted nearly an hour. By the time Cade rode back to the ranch, the sun was setting and his jaw was set with determination that would have made Jacob proud. He'd spent the past 3 sleepless nights thinking about Temperance's concerns, about propriety and reputation, and what was best for everyone involved. And he'd come to a conclusion that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He found Temperance in the kitchen, as usual, preparing tomorrow's bread, while the children played quietly in the parlor. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression made her hands still on the dough. Cade, is something wrong? He shook his head, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since he was 16, and asking the girl to dance for the first time. No, nothing's wrong, but I need to talk to you. Outside. His tone made it clear this wasn't a casual conversation, and Temperance's eyes widened slightly. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him out to the porch, where the evening air was cool and stars were beginning to appear overhead. For a long moment, Cade just stood there, looking out at the land Jacob had built, gathering courage for what he needed to say. I've been thinking about what Mrs. Henderson said. He started, about propriety and reputation, and how things look. And I realize she's right, not about us doing anything wrong, but about the situation being complicated. He turned to face Temperance directly. You said we can't let this become something it can't be. But what if we make it something it can be? Something proper and legal and above reproach? Temperance's breath caught, understanding dawning, but not quite believing what she was hearing. Cade reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I'm doing this all wrong. Jacob would know the right words, the romantic gestures. But I'm just going to say it plain. Temperance Whitley, will you marry me? The question hung in the air like something physical, impossible to ignore or misunderstand. Temperance stared at the box, at Cade's face, at the hope and fear mixed in his eyes. Cade, you don't have to, this isn't. She fumbled for words, tore between what she wanted and what she thought was right. You're asking because of gossip, because of propriety. That's not a reason to marry someone. Cade shook his head firmly. I'm asking because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Because those children need you, yes, but also because I need you. Because every morning I wake up and you're the first thing I think about. And every night I go to bed wishing I had the right to hold you. Because somewhere in the past 2 months, you stopped being just a governess and became everything. His voice was raw with honesty. The gossip just forced me to admit it sooner than I might have otherwise. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond, not extravagant, but clearly chosen with care. I'm not asking you to marry me for propriety's sake, though that's a benefit. I'm asking because I'm in love with you. I think I started falling the day you walked up with that basket of bread, and I haven't stopped. I know it's fast. I know you might not feel the same way, but I'm asking anyway, because life's too short and too uncertain to not fight for what matters. And you matter, Temperance. You matter more than reputation or gossip or anything else. His eyes pleaded with her to understand, to believe him, to take the leap with him into this terrifying, wonderful unknown. So I'll ask again, will you marry me? Not as a convenience, but as my wife, my partner, my equal in everything. Temperance felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was offering. Not just marriage, but belonging, not just security, but love, not just a position, but a home. She thought about all the years she drifted from place to place, raising other people's children, living in other people's houses, never quite belonging anywhere. She thought about how these past 2 months have felt different, how this place had become home, how these children had become hers in her heart, how this man had slipped past all her careful defenses and made her want things she'd given up hoping for. And she thought about what Jacob and Caroline would want for their children, a stable home with 2 parents who loved each other, who chose to build a family together, who could give those kids the security and love they deserved. Yes, she said, the word coming out choked with emotion, but clear. Yes, I'll marry you. Not because of gossip or propriety, but because I love you too. Because I can't imagine leaving this place or these children or you. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being a job and became my life, my family, my home. She was crying openly now, and Cade closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. The hug was fierce and desperate and full of relief, and when he pulled back just far enough to look at her face, he said, "Can I kiss you? As your fiancé, not your employer?" Temperance laughed through her tears and nodded, and when his lips met hers, it felt like everything in her life had been leading to this moment. This man, this place, this choice to stop drifting and finally, plant roots. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise, and when they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Cade slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and Temperance looked at it in wonder, the symbol of commitment, of choosing each other, of building something permanent. "We should tell the children," she said, practical even in the midst of emotional upheaval. Cade nodded. "Tomorrow. Tonight, let's just be. Let me hold you. Let us be happy without worrying about anything else." So they sat on the porch together. Temperance tucked against Cade's side, his arm around her shoulders, and watched the stars come out in full glory overhead. They talked about logistics, a simple wedding as soon as possible to silence gossip, a proper honeymoon someday when the children were older, plans for expanding the house to give them a real master bedroom. But mostly they just sat in the quiet joy of having found each other against all odds. 2 people who'd been alone finding completion in partnership. Inside, unseen by the adults, Nessa watched from the window with a smile on her face. She'd seen the kiss, understood what it meant, and felt a joy so fierce it made her want to cry. Miss Temperance was going to stay forever. She was going to be their real mother, not replacing Caroline. Nobody could do that, but becoming something new and equally precious. Uncle Cade was going to be happy again, instead of tired and sad all the time. And they were going to be a real family, the kind with a mama and papa and children who belonged together. Nessa went upstairs to her room and pulled out the journal she'd been keeping, the one where she wrote letters to her parents even though they'd never read them. "Dear Mama and Papa," she wrote carefully, "something wonderful happened today. Uncle Cade and Miss Temperance are getting married. I think you'd be happy about it. She's kind of like Mama was, and she makes Uncle Cade smile like he did when you were alive. We're going to be okay. I wanted you to know that wherever you are, we're going to be okay." She pressed her hand to the page like she could send a message through touch alone, then closed the journal and went to sleep more peacefully than she had in months. The next morning, Cade and Temperance gathered all 3 children in the parlor before breakfast, their serious expressions making the kids immediately nervous. Nessa looked worried. Finn's eyes went wide with fear, and Ivy clutched her rag doll tighter. They'd learned that serious adult conversations usually meant bad news. Their parents were gone, they had to leave their home. Things were changing in scary ways. Cade saw their fear and immediately softened his approach. kneeling down to their level. Hey, nobody's in trouble and nothing bad is happening. Actually, we have really good news. But the children remained wary, conditioned by loss to expect the worst. Temperance sat on the settee and gestured for them to come closer. We want to tell you something important. But first, I need to know if you've been happy these past 2 months. Have things been better since I came? Nessa nodded immediately. Yes, Miss Temperance. Everything's been so much better. We eat good food and the house is clean, and Uncle Cade isn't so tired all the time. Finn added quietly, and you're nice to us. You don't get mad when we make mistakes. Ivy, unable to articulate complex feelings, simply crawled into Temperance's lap and pressed her face against her chest. The ultimate toddler endorsement. Temperance stroked Ivy's hair and looked at Cade, silently communicating that he should take the lead. He cleared his throat, suddenly more nervous than he'd been facing down wild horses. Well, Miss Temperance and I have been talking, and we realize that we care about each other very much, and we want to make this arrangement permanent. So, he pulled the ring box from his pocket and showed them Temperance's hand with a gold band. Now Saturday, we're getting married. Miss Temperance is going to become my wife, and that means she'll be your Aunt Temperance. She'll officially be part of our family forever. The silence that followed was deafening. Nessa's mouth fell open. Finn looked confused, and Ivy just blinked between the adults like she didn't understand what was happening. Then Nessa whispered, "Forever? You're not going to leave?" Temperance heard the desperate hope in those words, the fear underneath, the need for reassurance that had been building since the day her parents died. "Never," Temperance said firmly. "I'm staying forever. I'm going to be your family, legally and officially, and in every way that matters. I'll be here for birthdays and Christmases and school days and sick days and every single day in between. I promise." Nessa launched herself at Temperance, nearly knocking Ivy off her lap, and burst into tears, great heaving sobs that she'd been holding back for months. "I wanted you to stay," she gasped between sobs. "I wanted it so much, but I was scared to ask because everyone leaves and I didn't want you to leave too." Temperance held her tight, her own tears falling into Nessa's hair. "I'm not going anywhere. Sweetheart, you're stuck with me now." Finn was processing more slowly, his face scrunched up in thought. "So, you're gonna be like our new mama, but not replacing our real mama." He needed that clarified, needed to know he wasn't betraying Caroline by accepting Temperance. Cade answered this one, understanding the complexity of the question. Your mama will always be your mama. Nobody can replace her or the love she had for you. But yes, Aunt Temperance will be like a new mama in that she'll take care of you and love you and be here for you. Your heart is big enough to hold love for both of them, the mama you lost and the aunt you're gaining. Does that make sense? Finn nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by launching himself at Cade and Temperance both, wrapping his small arms around both their necks and holding on tight. Ivy, finally understanding that something good was happening even if she didn't grasp all the details, clapped her hands and announced, "Mama Tempe." Her version of Temperance had been Tempe since the beginning, and now adding mama to it made Temperance's heart crack open with love. "That's right, baby girl," Temperance said, kissing the top of Ivy's head. "Mama Tempe." The four of them, soon to be officially bound by law and choice, sat tangled together in a group hug that felt like healing, like promise, like the beginning of something new rising from the ashes of terrible loss. After a few minutes, Nessa pulled back and wiped her eyes. "When's the wedding? Can I wear a fancy dress? Can we have a party?" Her 7-year-old priorities were reasserting themselves now that the shock was wearing off. Temperance laughed. "We're thinking very soon, maybe 2 weeks. And yes, you can absolutely wear a fancy dress. We'll make a real celebration." Finn asked, "Will you still make cinnamon rolls after you're married?" The question made both adults laugh, because trust a 5-year-old to worry about the truly important things. "Yes," Temperance assured him. "I'll still make cinnamon rolls and all your other favorite foods. The only thing that's changing is that Uncle Cade and I will be married. Everything else, the routines, the meals, the way we take care of you, that all stays the same." That seemed to satisfy him. And soon the children were chattering excitedly about the wedding, about whether there would be cake, about who they could invite, about 1,000 small details that proved they were accepting this change as the good thing it was. As Temperance and Cade exchanged glances over children's heads, both felt the rightness of this decision settling deeper. They were giving these children what they needed most: stability, love, and a future that promised they'd never be alone again. And in the process, they were giving themselves something precious too, a family built on choice and commitment and love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. Mrs. Henderson and her gossiping friends would have their field day when news of the engagement spread. But as Temperance watched Cade tickle Ivy until she giggled and listened to Nessa and Finn making wedding plans, she realized she didn't care what anyone else thought. This was her family now. This was her home, and she was going to protect it and nurture it and fight for it with everything she had. Because some things were worth fighting for, and this makeshift, patched together, absolutely perfect family was at the top of that list. News of the engagement spread through Copper Valley faster than wildfire, exactly as they'd expected. The reaction was mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them, understanding that the arrangement made sense and legitimized what had been a slightly scandalous situation. Others were suspicious, convinced this was a marriage of convenience rather than love. Mrs. Henderson, to her credit, swallowed her earlier concerns and became an unlikely ally, perhaps feeling guilty about her previous interference, or perhaps genuinely warming to the idea of romance blooming from hardship. She showed up at the ranch with fabric for Nessa's dress and offered to help with wedding preparations. And Temperance accepted because frontier pragmatism meant you didn't reject help even when it came from complicated sources. Besides, the children liked Mrs. Henderson, and that mattered more than any awkward history between the adults. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Temperance continued her usual duties: cooking, cleaning, teaching, but now with the added complexity of wedding planning. She kept it simple, because that suited both her practical nature and their budget. The ceremony would be at the church with Reverend Matthews officiating, followed by a small reception at the ranch with food prepared by Temperance herself and any neighbors who wanted to contribute. Her dress would be a new one, a beautiful cream-colored cotton that Mrs. Henderson helped her sew, simple but elegant with lace at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't the elaborate gown some brides might dream of, but Temperance had never been one for elaborate. What mattered was the meaning behind it, the commitment being made, the future being built. Cade threw himself into ranch work with even more intensity than usual, partly because there was always work to be done, but mostly because he was nervous. He'd never imagined himself married, had always been the drifting brother, the one who avoided commitment, the one who showed up and left on his own schedule. Now he was pledging himself to one woman and 3 children for the rest of his life, and the weight of that responsibility was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. His ranch hands noticed his distraction and teased him mercilessly, which helped ease the tension. "Boss is getting hitched," they'd say, grinning. "Gonna be domesticated proper now." Cade would throw dirt clods at them and laugh. But privately, he marveled at how much his life had changed in just a few short months. From barely surviving bachelor to fiancé and father figure. It was dizzying when he thought about it too much. The children were invested in the wedding with an intensity that surprised both adults. Nessa appointed herself official wedding coordinator, making lists of tasks and checking them off with serious dedication. She helped Temperance with cooking preparation, practiced walking down the aisle with a basket of flower petals, and worried endlessly about every detail being perfect. "It has to be perfect," she told Temperance one evening while they were kneading bread together. "Because you're getting married to Uncle Cade and staying with us forever, and that's the most important thing ever." Temperance hugged her flower dusted and said, "It'll be perfect because we'll all be together. That's what makes it matter, not fancy decorations or expensive food. Just family choosing to be family." But she understood Nessa's need for perfection. The girl had seen so much chaos and loss, and creating something beautiful felt like taking back control from a universe that had taken too much. Finn was more concerned with practical matters. "After you marry Uncle Cade, will you still sleep in your little room?" he asked one morning at breakfast. Temperance and Cade exchanged glances, having discussed this exact question extensively. "No," Temperance said gently. "After the wedding, Uncle Cade and I will share his room, because that's what married people do." But my little room will still be there, and will turn into something useful. Maybe a sewing room, or a place to store preserves, or whatever the household needs. Finn processed this and seemed satisfied. Ivy, at 3, didn't fully understand what was happening, but picked up on everyone else's excitement and made wedding her new favorite word, shouting it randomly throughout the day and clapping her hands. Her enthusiasm was infectious and helped keep spirits light, even when wedding stress threatened to overwhelm. 3 days before the ceremony, Temperance had a moment of panic. She was in the kitchen making yet another meal when suddenly the weight of what she was doing hit her. She was marrying a man she'd known for less than 3 months. She was committing to raising 3 children who weren't hers by blood. She was tying herself permanently to a place when her entire adult life had been defined by movement and impermanence. What if she failed? What if she couldn't be what they needed? What if Cade woke up 6 months from now and regretted marrying hired help? The fear spiraled until she was hyperventilating, her hands shaking, flour forgotten. That's how Cade found her, sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, breathing too fast, tears streaming down her face. He didn't ask questions, just sat down beside her and pulled her against his chest, one hand stroking her hair, the other holding her tight. "Breathe with me," he said quietly, and he exaggerated his own breathing until she could match it, slow and steady, in and out. When she'd calm enough to speak, he asked simply, "Second thoughts?" Temperance shook her head against his chest. "Not second thoughts about you, or the children, or wanting this. Just fear. That I'm not enough. That I'll fail you all. That this is too much responsibility, and I'll crack under it." Cade tilted her face up, so she had to look at him. "You've been carrying this household for 2 months without cracking. You've turned 3 traumatized children into kids who smile again. You've taken a man who is drowning and given him hope. If that's not enough, I don't know what would be." His eyes were fierce with certainty. "You're not doing this alone. Temperance, we're partners. When you're weak, I'll be strong. When I'm lost, you'll find a way. That's what marriage is. Not one person carrying everything, but 2 people sharing the load. And we're going to be fine. Better than fine. We're going to build something Jacob and Caroline will be proud of." His faith in her, in them, in their future together, pulled Temperance back from the edge of panic. She kissed him then, deeply, desperately grateful, and when they broke apart, she felt steady again. 3 days. In 3 days, she'd become Mrs. Cade Brennan, and everything would change forever. But for the first time since accepting his proposal, Temperance believed with her whole heart that the change would be for the better. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, late spring sunshine washing everything in gold. Temperance woke before dawn as usual, her body still on its work schedule despite the significance of the day, and lay in her small room for the last time wondering if she should feel different. Today she'd become a wife. Today this room would cease to be hers, and she'd move into Cade's space. Their space now. Today everything would be official and legal and permanent. The thought should terrify her. But instead she felt only peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. She rose and went through her morning routine one last time as Miss Whitley, then began preparing breakfast for her family. Because they were her family already, ceremony or not, Mrs. Henderson arrived mid-morning with 3 other church ladies, shooing Temperance out of the kitchen and taking over final food preparation. "You're not cooking your own wedding breakfast," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Go get yourself ready. We'll handle this." It felt strange to be waited on instead of serving, but Temperance submitted gracefully, understanding that the community needed to feel useful, needed to contribute to this union. They'd first questioned and now mostly supported. She went upstairs and helped Nessa into her new dress. Pale blue with white ribbons, beautiful enough to make the girl gasp when she saw herself in the mirror. Finn was already dressed in his Sunday suit, looking uncomfortable but proud, and Ivy wore a little white dress that made her look like an angel, though her personality remained decidedly earthbound. Then it was time for Temperance's own transformation. Mrs. Henderson and another woman helped her into the cream dress, arranged her copper hair in an elegant style with small flowers woven through, and pinned a simple veil. When Temperance looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself, not because she looked so different, but because she looked happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd never seen in her own reflection before. This was what contentment looked like. This was what home felt like. "You look beautiful," Nessa breathed, and Temperance turned to see all 3 children staring at her with awe. "Not half as beautiful as you 3, Temperance said, pulling them into a careful hug that wouldn't crush anyone's outfit. "Today you're getting a new aunt, but I'm getting the greatest gift. I'm getting you. And I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter how life changes, I will always be here for you. Always." The ceremony was simple and profound. The small church was packed with neighbors and ranch hands and curious townspeople who'd come to witness the unlikely union. Cade stood at the altar in his best suit, his stitched forehead scar visible, but somehow making him more handsome rather than less. Evidence of survival, of fighting through storms both literal and metaphorical. When Temperance walked down the aisle with Nessa, Finn, and Ivy beside her, no father to give her away, but children to walk her into her new life. Cade's eyes filled with tears. This woman who'd appeared on his porch with bread and competence, who'd save them all without any of them realizing how desperately they needed saving, was choosing him, choosing them, choosing this life. It felt like grace he didn't deserve, but would spend his life being worthy of. Reverend Matthews led them through traditional vows with slight modifications they'd requested. When he got the part about children, he acknowledged Nessa, Finn, and Ivy specifically, asking them if they accepted Temperance as their aunt and Temperance if she accepted them as her family. The children's yes rang through the church, and more than a few people dabbed at tears. When Cade slipped a simple gold band onto Temperance's finger and she slipped a matching one onto his, she'd insisted on him having one too, symbol of mutual commitment. It felt like a covenant being made not just between 2 people but among 5, a family being forged through choice and love rather than blood alone. And when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife and told Cade to kiss his bride, the kiss was tender and sweet and full of promise for all the kisses yet to come. The reception back at the ranch was joyful chaos. Tables set up in a yard grown under the weight of food everyone had contributed. Roasted meats and fresh bread, pies and cakes, vegetables from gardens just beginning to produce. Children ran wild while adults talked and laughed. The community coming together to celebrate new beginnings. Cade and Temperance moved through the crowd receiving congratulations and well wishes, but their eyes kept finding each other across distances, silently communicating joy and relief and love. At one point, old Mr. Fletcher from Triple Bar Ranch raised his glass and offered a toast. To Cade and Temperance, may your marriage be as strong as the foundation you've already built, and may those children know the blessing of love even in the face of loss. To family, chosen and cherished. Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Temperance felt tears slide down her cheeks because this was real, this was happening, this was hers. As evening approached and guests began departing, Mrs. Henderson pulled Temperance aside one last time. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "When I came to talk about propriety, I was wrong. You didn't need marriage to make the situation right. It was already right, already good, already serving those children better than any alternative. The ceremony today just made official what was already true. You and Cade are a family, and you've been since the day you walked into his kitchen." Temperance hugged her, forgiving the earlier judgment because frontier life was hard enough without holding grudges. "Thank you for your help," she said sincerely, "and for the beautiful dress. This day wouldn't have been the same without you." Mrs. Henderson smiled through her own tears and left, and Temperance turned to find Cade watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "Ready to end our wedding day and start our marriage?" he asked, extending his hand. The children were staying overnight with the Fletchers, a planned arrangement to give the newlyweds privacy. Temperance took Cade's hand and let him lead her back into the house. Their house now, shared and official. As they stood in the kitchen where so much had changed, where burned biscuits had led to warm bread, had led to love and commitment, Cade pulled her close and kissed her properly. No audience, no time constraints. Just the 2 of them beginning forever. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I'll love you every day for the rest of my life." Temperance kissed him back and replied, "I love you too, and I'm so glad I walked through your door with that basket of bread." They both laughed, remembering that day, marveling at how far they'd come. And as Cade swept her into his arms and carried her upstairs, traditional and sweet and exactly right, Temperance knew with absolute certainty that she finally found what she'd been searching for all her drifting years: a place to belong, people to love, and a future worth building, one day and one choice and one small act of courage at a time. Marriage changed everything and nothing. The daily routines remained mostly the same. Temperance still woke before dawn to start bread. Cade still headed out to work the ranch. The children still needed meals and lessons and bedtime stories. But underneath the familiar patterns ran a current of new intimacy that transformed ordinary moments into something precious. Sharing a bed, sharing space, sharing 1,000 small vulnerabilities that came with truly being partners. It was adjustment and joy in equal measure. Temperance had to learn Cade's habits. How he liked his coffee, how he needed silence in the mornings before he fully woke, how he'd come in from working and immediately seek her out. Not saying anything, but just needing her presence like confirmation that this was real, that she was still here, that he hadn't dreamed the entire thing. Cade learned Temperance's patterns too, how she hummed while cooking, always the same melody her mother had sung to her as a child, how she needed the kitchen exactly organized, everything in its place, because chaos in her workspace created chaos in her mind. How she'd sometimes wake in the middle of the night from dreams of her childhood farm and need to be held without talking, just anchored by his arms until the memories released their grip. They were learning to be married, which was different from learning to work together or even learning to love each other. Marriage required a particular kind of vulnerability, a daily choosing of each other over easier options, a constant navigation of where one person ended and another began. It was harder than either expected, but also more rewarding. Each small negotiation and compromise weaving them tighter together. The children adjusted to the new family configuration with surprising ease. To them, the biggest change was calling Temperance Aunt Tempe now instead of Miss Temperance, and seeing her and Uncle Cade be affectionate with each other, holding hands, stealing kisses when they thought nobody was watching, the casual intimacy of married people who genuinely liked each other. Nessa, perceptive as always, watched it all with satisfaction. "You make Uncle Cade happy," she told Temperance one morning while they worked in the garden together. "He smiles. More now. He used to look so sad all the time, even when he was trying to be cheerful for us. But with you, he's really happy." The observation was delivered matter-of-factly, but Temperance heard the relief underneath. These children had seen too much sadness. Witnessing adult happiness must feel like proof that good things could still happen. Finn's adjustment showed in different ways. He'd started following Cade everywhere, mimicking his walk and his mannerisms, clearly desperate for male guidance in figuring out how to be a man. Cade rose to the challenge, taking Finn with him on ranch work when appropriate, teaching him about horses and cattle and the responsibility of stewarding land and animals. But he also made sure Finn knew that manhood included gentleness, that strength could be quiet, that it was okay to cry and need help and not have all the answers. "Your papa was the strongest man I knew," Cade told Finn one evening while teaching him to curry a horse. "And you know how I knew? Because he wasn't afraid to be gentle, wasn't afraid to admit when he needed Caroline's help or wisdom. Real strength isn't about never being scared or sad. It's about being those things and showing up anyway." Finn absorbed these lessons like a plant soaking up water, growing visibly under Cade's attention and guidance. Ivy, at 3, simply accepted the new reality with toddler pragmatism. She had Mama Tempe and Papa Cade. She started calling that now, unable to manage Uncle, and that was all she needed to feel secure. She followed Temperance around like a small shadow, helping with chores in ways that made everything take twice as long, but filled Temperance's heart with joy. When Ivy started having nightmares, remnants of trauma her young mind couldn't fully process, Temperance would carry her into rooms she now shared with Cade, and they'd both hold her until she fell back asleep. Those midnight moments, with a child between them and darkness outside and love holding all of them together, felt sacred in a way Temperance couldn't articulate. This was family. This was what she'd been searching for, without knowing it. This messy, complicated, absolutely perfect family. A month into the marriage, on a Sunday evening after the children were in bed, Temperance and Cade sat on the porch watching stars and reflecting on how far they'd come. "Do you ever regret it?" Temperance asked quietly. "Marrying me so fast?" taking on all of this. She gestured vaguely, meaning the children, the household, the complications of blending a family. Cade pulled her closer against his side. "Never," he said firmly. "Not one single day. You know what I regret? That I wasted 8 months struggling alone when I could have accepted help sooner. That I let pride and fear almost destroy us before we even started. But marrying you? Best decision I ever made." He tilted her face up, so she had to look at him. "What about you? Any regrets?" Temperance thought about it honestly before answering. "I regret that Jacob and Caroline aren't here to see what we're building with their children. I wish they could know their kids are safe and loved and healing. But marrying you, being part of this family, no regrets. None at all." They kissed then, slow and sweet, tasting of contentment and coffee and the comfortable intimacy of people who'd chosen each other and were choosing each other again every day. The future stretched ahead uncertain but no longer frightening, because whatever came, they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. 3 months into marriage, crisis arrived in the form of scarlet fever sweeping through Copper Valley. It started with children in town, then spread to outlying ranches with terrifying speed. Temperance heard about it at church and immediately went into protective mode, limiting the children's contact with others, obsessively cleaning, watching for any sign of illness with the vigilance of someone who'd seen too many children die from diseases that couldn't be stopped. For a week, they seemed safe, isolated enough on the ranch that maybe the fever would pass them by. Then Finn woke one morning with a rash and a fever that made Temperance's blood run cold. She knew that rash. She'd seen it before in other households. Scarlet fever had come to their door despite all her precautions. Cade wanted to immediately ride for Doc Morrison, but Temperance stopped him. "We need to quarantine. Finn stays isolated, one person caring for him. The others need to be kept away, so they don't catch it. And Doc Morrison is probably overwhelmed with cases. We can't wait for him. I've nursed scarlet fever before. I know what to do." Her voice was calm, but her hand shook as she organized supplies. Cool water for compresses, willow bark tea for the fever, clean sheets, a bell so Finn could call if he needed something. She set up a sick room in the small parlor downstairs, moving Finn there so he wouldn't infect his siblings. Cade tried to insist on helping, but Temperance was firm. "No, you stay with Nessa and Ivy. Keep them upstairs. Keep them distracted. I'll handle Finn." She saw a protest in his eyes and cut it off. "Cade, if we all get sick, nobody can care for the children. This is a smart way. Trust me." So began the longest 2 weeks of their marriage. Temperance moved into the parlor with Finn, sleeping in a chair when she slept at all, sponging his burning skin with cool water, forcing liquids down his throat even when he was too weak to swallow properly, monitoring his breathing for signs of the lung complications that killed so many scarlet fever patients. The fever raged for 4 days, Finn delirious and calling for his mother, breaking Temperance's heart over and over. She held his hand and whispered stories and promises, bargaining with God the way desperate people do when life hangs in the balance. "Please don't take him," she prayed into the darkness. "Please, these children have lost so much already. Please let him live." She wasn't sure she believed anyone was listening, but the words needed saying anyway. Cade managed the rest of the household, keeping Nessa and Ivy occupied upstairs while trying not to go mad with worry. He brought food to the parlor door 3 times a day, leaving it outside and backing away so Temperance could take it without exposing him. They'd have brief whispered conversations through the door, status updates, reassurances, expressions of love and fear they couldn't fully voice with children potentially listening. "How is he?" Cade would ask, his voice tight with dread. Fighting, Temperance would answer, which was both truth and evasion because some things were too terrible to say aloud. Nessa understood something was very wrong and became unnaturally quiet, helping with Ivy without being asked, doing her lessons without complaint, trying to be good enough that maybe God would notice and save her brother. Her 7-year-old logic broke Cade's heart, but he didn't know how to explain that goodness didn't prevent tragedy, that sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason at all. On the 5th day, Finn's fever broke. Temperance woke from an exhausted doze in her chair to find him looking at her with clear eyes, the terrible flush gone from his cheeks, his breathing easier. "Aunt Tempe," he whispered, "I'm thirsty." It was the most beautiful sentence Temperance had ever heard. She burst into tears and kissed his forehead and thanked God and fate and anything else that might have been listening. Finn was going to live. The worst was over. It took another week of careful nursing before Finn was strong enough to be around others. Another week of Temperance isolated with him, slowly regaining her own strength after the ordeal of intensive caregiving. But when Doc Morrison finally came to check on them and pronounced Finn recovered with no lasting damage, Temperance nearly collapsed with relief. The family could be together again. The crisis had passed. They'd survived. That night, after the children were finally asleep and Temperance had scrubbed herself raw to remove any trace of sickness, she and Cade clung to each other in their bed and shook with the aftermath of fear. "I thought we might lose him," Cade admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought—" He couldn't finish. Temperance held him tighter. "I know. I was terrified too. But he's okay. He's going to be okay." They both cried then, releasing the terror they'd held back for 2 weeks, letting grief for what could happen flow out in tears that soaked pillows and tangled in each other's hair. This was marriage too. Not just the joy, but the fear. Not just the building, but the protecting. Not just the love, but the terrible vulnerability of loving people you could lose. Tomorrow they'd be strong again. Tomorrow they'd celebrate Finn's recovery and return to normal routines. But tonight, they let themselves be human. Let themselves feel all the fear they'd been too busy to acknowledge while fighting for a child's life. And in the sharing of that fear, in the holding of each other through the shaking and tears, they became even more tightly bound. Partners who'd faced crisis together and emerged on the other side still standing, still loving, still committed protecting this family no matter what it cost them. Fall arrived with its usual Arizona subtlety. Days still hot, but nights growing cool. The light shifting from summer's harsh brightness to something softer and more golden. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and the Brennan household had settled into rhythms that felt permanent rather than provisional. Nessa was thriving in school, her confidence growing as she excelled in reading and writing. Finn had fully recovered from scarlet fever and seemed to come through it somehow more solid, less fragile, as a surviving illness had proven to him that he could survive anything. Ivy, now 3.5, was talking in full sentences and developing a personality that was equal parts stubborn independence and desperate affection. The ranch was profitable. The household ran smoothly, and Cade and Temperance had found their rhythm as partners in every sense. Married, yes, but also genuine friends who liked each other as much as they loved each other, which Temperance had learned was rarer than people admitted. Then one October evening, Temperance made an announcement that would change everything again. They were sitting on the porch after dinner. The children played in the yard when she took Cade's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, watching his face for reaction. "About 3 months along, I think. I want to be sure before I told you." Cade went completely still, his hand frozen on her abdomen, his expression cycling through shock, joy, fear, and back to joy. "A baby?" he finally managed. "Our baby." Temperance nodded, nervous about his response despite his obvious happiness. "I know we didn't plan this. I know 3 children is already a lot. But I want this baby. Cade, I want to give you a child of your own, not just Jacob's kids that we're raising. Is that okay?" Cade pulled her into his arms, so fiercely she gasped. "Okay? Temperance, it's more than okay. It's..." His voice broke with emotion. "It's everything. A baby. Our baby." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining with tears. "But are you all right? 3 months. You've been keeping this to yourself? Are you feeling well? Do you need Doc Morrison? Should you be working so hard?" The questions tumbled over each other, concern for her overriding everything else. Temperance laughed and kissed him. "I'm fine. I wanted to wait until I was past the dangerous first months before telling anyone. And yes, I've been tired and nauseous, but that's normal. I'll need to adjust my workload as I get bigger. But for now, I'm managing." She paused, then added what was really worrying her. "How do we tell the children? Will they feel replaced? Will they worry the new baby means we'll love them less?" That question sobered Cade immediately. He'd been so caught up in his own joy that he hadn't considered how Nessa, Finn, and Ivy might react. These children had already lost one set of parents. Would they see a new baby as a threat to their place in this reconstituted family? We tell them together, he decided. Tonight, we're honest about it. Let them ask questions. Make sure they know this doesn't change how we feel about them. So after the children's baths, when everyone was settled in the parlor for their evening ritual, Cade and Temperance sat down with serious faces that immediately made the children nervous. Nessa's eyes went wide. What's wrong? Is someone sick again? The scarlet fever had left its mark in her instant assumption that serious conversations meant bad news. Nothing's wrong, Temperance said quickly, pulling Nessa close. Actually, we have good news, but it's big news and we want to tell you together so you could ask any questions you have. She took a deep breath. There's going to be a baby. Uncle Cade and I are going to have a baby together. Probably sometime in spring. You three are going to be big cousins. She watched their faces carefully, trying to gauge reactions. Nessa looked shocked, then thoughtful. Finn's mouth dropped open. Ivy tilted her head like a confused puppy and asked, "Where'd baby come from?" Which would have been funny under different circumstances. Temperance gave a simple, age-appropriate explanation about babies growing in mothers' bellies. But she could see Nessa's mind working through more complicated questions. Will you still love us? Nessa finally asked, her voice small and scared. When the new baby comes, will you forget about us because it's really yours? The question gutted Temperance, revealing how fragile Nessa's sense of security still was despite months of stability. She pulled the girl into her lap, getting harder now with pregnancy making her middle thicker, and looked directly into her eyes. Listen to me very carefully, Nessa. You are mine. Finn is mine. Ivy is mine. Not because I gave birth to you, but because I chose you and you chose me, and we're a family now. The new baby will be mine too, yes, but not more mine than you are. My heart doesn't have a limited amount of love. It grows bigger for every person I love. Do you understand? Nessa nodded slowly, wanted to believe but still uncertain. Cade picked up where Temperance left off. Think of it this way. When your mama and papa had Finn, did they love you less? And when they had Ivy, did they stop loving you and Finn? Nessa shook her head. No, they loved all of us. Cade nodded. Exactly, because that's how family works. New people don't replace old people. They just make the family bigger and better. This baby is going to be your cousin, and you three are going to be the best big cousins in the whole world. Teaching the baby everything you know. Finn spoke up then, his voice thoughtful. Will the baby call you Mama and Papa like Ivy does? It was a loaded question, acknowledging that while they called Temperance Aunt Tempe to honor their real mother's memory, the new baby would call her Mama from the start. Yes, Temperance said honestly, the baby will call me Mama, but that doesn't change what you call me or how I feel about you. You get to decide what you're comfortable with. If you want to keep calling me Aunt Tempe forever, that's perfect. If someday you want to call me something else, that's okay too. There's no wrong answer. The conversation lasted another hour, the children asking questions ranging from practical, will the baby sleep, to philosophical, will the baby remember Mama and Papa Caroline even though it never met them? Temperance and Cade answered everything honestly, making space for complicated feelings, validating fears while offering reassurance. By the end, even Nessa seemed cautiously excited, already planning how she'd help with the baby, what she'd teach it, how she'd be the best big cousin ever. As Temperance tucked them into bed that night, Nessa whispered, Aunt Tempe, I'm glad there's going to be a baby. It makes us feel more like a real family. Temperance kissed her forehead and whispered back, We've been a real family since the day I walked through your door, but I'm glad you're happy about the baby. And as she closed Nessa's door and headed downstairs to where Cade waited, Temperance felt the pieces of her life clicking into place with a satisfaction she'd never experienced before. She had a husband who loved her. She had 3 children who needed her. And soon, she'd have a baby of her own, a new life to symbolize new beginnings. The scared, drifting woman who'd shown up a basket of bread was gone forever, replaced by someone rooted and certain and finally home. The pregnancy progressed through winter with relative ease. Temperance adjusted her workload as her belly grew, accepting help from Nessa and even learning to let some things go. The house didn't need to be spotless every day. Meals could be simpler when she was too tired for elaborate cooking, and the world didn't end if someone else took over tasks she'd previously controlled. Learning to release control was harder than she'd expected, but Cade was patient and supportive, taking on more domestic duties without complaint. He learned to braid Nessa's hair, messily at first, but improving with practice. He figured out how to make edible breakfast beyond coffee and burned offerings. He became competent at bedtime routines and homework help. Watching him grow into fatherhood filled Temperance with a love so fierce it sometimes took her breath away. The children adapted to the coming baby with enthusiasm that ebbed and flowed. Some days they were excited, chattering about names and making drawings for the nursery. Other days they were anxious, needing extra reassurance that they'd still matter once the baby arrived. Temperance and Cade navigated these emotional swings with patience, understanding that security had to be built through consistent action, not just words. They maintained their Sunday tradition of sharing stories about Jacob and Caroline, making sure those children knew their parents' memory remained honored even as the family evolved. They included the kids in pregnancy preparations, letting them feel the baby kick, asking their opinions on baby clothes, reading books about being big cousins. Every action reinforced the message: you belong, you matter, you're essential to this family. Doc Morrison visited monthly as Temperance's due date approached, pronouncing her healthy and the baby strong. Should be an easy birth, he predicted in late March. You're young, healthy. You've done physical work that's kept you strong. Baby's positioned well. Shouldn't be any problems. His confidence helped ease Temperance's private fears about childbirth. She'd helped deliver babies in other households, but had never experienced it herself. And stories of women dying in childbirth were common enough to fuel nightmares. Cade sensed her fear even when she didn't voice it, and held her extra close at night, his hand on her belly feeling their child move, silently promising to keep her safe even though they both knew some things were beyond anyone's control. In early April, on a morning so beautiful it seemed designed by God to welcome new life, Temperance's water broke while she was making breakfast. The contraction started soon after, not unbearable yet, but definitely present. She stayed calm, years of managing households having taught her to function through discomfort. She finished breakfast, fed the children, gave them instructions to stay with Mrs. Fletcher, who'd been on standby for weeks, and then finally told Cade, it's time. She'd seen him face down wild horses and dangerous storms with steady nerves, but the color drained from his face at those two words. Time? Now. Should I get Doc Morrison? Should you sit down? Should I? Temperance took his face in her hands. Breathe. I'm fine. Yes? Send someone for Doc Morrison. Yes, I'll lie down. But Cade, I need you calm. Can you be calm for me? He nodded, visibly pulling himself together, and swung into action with the confidence that had first attracted her to him. He sent a ranch hand racing for Doc Morrison, got Temperance settled in their bed with clean sheets and supplies nearby, checked on the children to make sure they understood Aunt Tempe was having the baby, and everything was fine. Then he came back to her side and held her hand through contractions that were getting progressively stronger and closer together. Hours passed. Doc Morrison arrived and examined her, pronouncing everything normal. Temperance labored through the afternoon and into evening, Cade beside her the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until his bones ached, wiping sweat from her forehead, murmuring encouragement when the pain got bad enough that she started doubting she could do this. You're the strongest person I know, he told her during a particularly brutal contraction. You walked into a stranger's house and saved his life. You turned 3 broken children into a family. You survived scarlet fever and frontier hardship and every challenge life threw at you. You can do this. I know you can. As the sun set in brilliant orange and gold, painting their bedroom in warm light, Temperance gave a final push and their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that announced she was healthy and strong and ready to take on life. Doc Morrison placed her on Temperance's chest, and both parents stared in wonder at the tiny, perfect creature they created. She had Cade's dark hair and Temperance's nose and a determination in her squalling that promised she'd be a force to reckon with. She's beautiful, Cade whispered, tears streaming down his face without shame. You're beautiful. You did it. Temperance was crying too, exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than she'd ever imagined possible. "We need to bring in the children," she said. "They need to meet their cousin." So Kay went to get Nessa, Finn, and Ivy, and they tiptoed in, with awestruck faces, to meet the newest member of their family. "This is your cousin," Temperance said softly as they gathered around the bed. "We're going to name her Caroline Hope. Caroline after your mama, because she deserves to be remembered and honored. And Hope because that's what she represents. Hope for the future. Hope that good things can come after bad things. Hope that families can heal and love can grow even after terrible loss." Nessa burst into tears at hearing her mother's name given to the baby, and Temperance pulled her close with her free arm. "Your mama would be so proud of you, sweet girl, of how brave you've been, how you've helped hold this family together. This baby will know about her namesake because you'll tell her stories. You'll make sure Caroline's memory lives on." Finn reached out carefully to touch the baby's tiny hand, and when her fingers closed around his face lit up with wonder. "She's strong," he pronounced, "like Papa Jacob was strong." Ivy, not to be outdone, kissed the baby's forehead with what enthusiasm, and announced, "My baby," which made everyone laugh despite their tears. They stayed like that for a long time, the 7 of them if you counted Jacob and Caroline's presence and spirit, crowded together in the bedroom while the last light faded from the sky. A cowboy and a governess who'd never expected to find love. 3 children who'd lost everything and found new hope. And a baby who represented the future. Proof that life continued, that joy could follow sorrow, that family could be built and rebuilt and made whole again through choice and commitment and love that refused to quit. This was what Temperance had been searching for all her drifting years, though she hadn't known it. Not just a place, but a purpose. Not just a job, but calling. Not just survival, but a life worth living, rich with meaning and connection, and the daily sacred work of showing up for the people who counted on you. As Cade leaned over to kiss her, their children surrounding them and their baby daughter sleeping peacefully, Temperance thought about that day a month ago when she walked up to a desperate man's door with a basket of warm bread. She thought she was offering help. She hadn't known she was walking into her own salvation, her own second chance, her own miraculous transformation from rootless drifter to the center of a family's universe. But that's how grace works sometimes. You thought you were saving others and discovered they were saving you right back, everyone healing together, everyone choosing each other, everyone becoming more than they'd been alone. And that, Temperance decided as sleep finally claimed her exhausted body, was the finest definition of family she'd ever known. 1 year after baby Caroline's birth, the Brennan Ranch hosted its first proper celebration, a spring gathering that brought together neighbors, friends, and the scattered community that had watched this unlikely family form and thrive. Tables groaned with food that Temperance had prepared with help from Nessa, who was now 9 and remarkably competent in the kitchen. Finn, 7 years old and growing tall like his father had been, helped Cade manage the horses visitors rode on, his chest puffed with pride of being trusted with real responsibility. Ivy, now 4.5, ran wild with other children, her laughter ringing across the yard, a sound that had been absent for too long after her parents' death, but now came easily and often. And baby Caroline, 1 year old and walking with determined, wobbling steps, was passed from person to person, admired and cooed over and celebrated as the symbol of new beginnings she was. Temperance moved through the crowd with Caroline on her hip, accepting congratulations and catching up with people she'd come to know as neighbors rather than strangers. Mrs. Henderson approached with a smile that held no judgment now, only genuine warmth. "Look at what you built here," she said, gesturing at the thriving household, the happy children, the well-maintained ranch. "When you first came to Copper Valley, I'll admit I had my doubts, but you've proven me wrong in the best possible way. This family is a testament to what's possible when people choose love over fear." Temperance accepted the compliment graciously, no longer holding grudges over early skepticism. Everyone had a right to their doubts, and she'd proven herself through action rather than argument. That felt like a more solid victory than any words could have provided. Cade found her as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, pulling her and Caroline aside from the crowd. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led them to the small rise behind the barn where Jacob and Caroline were buried, Their graves marked with simple but beautiful headstones that Cade had commissioned months ago. Fresh wildflowers lay on each grave. Nessa's doing, part of her weekly ritual of tending her parents' resting place. Cade set Caroline down on her wobbling feet and kept one hand on her back to steady her. "Jacob," he said, speaking to his brother as if he could hear, "it's been 2 years since you died. 2 years since you trusted me with your children and your ranch and everything you'd built. I want you to know we're okay. We're more than okay." Nessa's thriving in school and talks about becoming a teacher someday. Finn's learning the ranch work and has your gift with horses. Ivy's fierce and funny and keeps us all on our toes. And this little one, he touched Caroline's head. "She's named for your Caroline because we'll never forget what you two built here, the love you gave those kids, the foundation you laid that we're building on." Temperance felt tears sliding down her cheeks as Cade continued. "I found love, Jacob. Found it with a woman who walked into my disaster with warm bread and competence and stayed when anyone sensible would have run. She saved us, all of us, made us a family again when I thought we were broken beyond repair. And I thank you to prove. I think you like her stubbornness and her kindness and the way she makes your kids feel safe." He turned to Temperance, his eyes wet but his voice steady. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who didn't know the first thing about raising kids. Thank you for seeing what we could become instead of just what we were. Thank you for loving my brother's children like they were your own and giving me a daughter and building this family from broken pieces into something whole." His voice broke. "Thank you for choosing us when you could have chosen anything else." Temperance set Caroline down next to Cade and wrapped her arms around her husband. "Thank you for letting me in," she said against his chest. "Thank you for trusting me with your family and your heart. Thank you for being the kind of man who honors his brother's memory by raising those children with love instead of obligation. Thank you for making space for me in a life that was already full." They stood like that for a long moment, baby Caroline between them pulling at their legs and babbling her own incomprehensible contribution to the moment. Then Temperance knelt by the graves, balancing carefully, and spoke directly to the two people she'd never met but knew intimately through stories and journals and the legacy they'd left behind. "Jacob and Caroline, I'll take care of them. All of them, your children and mine, and the man I married. I promise you that. And I'll make sure your memory stays alive, that your children know where they came from and who loved them first. Thank you for building something worth preserving. We're honoring that gift every day." As they walked back to the celebration, Caroline toddling between them holding both their hands, Temperance looked out over the ranch and the gathered community and the family she'd built from nothing, and felt satisfaction so complete it was almost frightening. This was success, not wealth or status or any external measure, but the daily sacred work of showing up for people who needed you, of choosing love when fear would be easier, of building and rebuilding until broken things became whole again. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, rootless, alone, drifting from job to job with no place to call home. That woman wouldn't recognize who she'd become. Wife, mother, aunt, community member, someone with roots so deep that pulling them up would destroy her. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She'd found her place. She'd found her people. She'd found herself in the process of saving others and being saved right back. The party continued into the evening, children playing tag in the twilight, while adults talked and laughed and shared stories. At one point, old Mr. Fletcher stood and raised his glass for a toast to the Brennan family, blood and chosen, living and remembered, to Cade, who honored his brother by becoming the father those children needed, to Temperance, who walked into chaos with warm bread and made it a home, to Nessa, Finn, and Ivy, who survived terrible loss and came through it with grace, and to little Caroline, who represents hope for all of us that life continues, that joy follows sorrow, that families can be healed and made whole again. May we all be so blessed. Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Temperance caught Cade's eye across the crowd. In that look was everything, gratitude and love and commitment, and the quiet satisfaction of two people who'd built something worth keeping. As the last guest departed and the family began cleaning up, working together with the efficient coordination of people who knew each other's rhythms, Temperance paused to simply observe and appreciate. Cade teasing Finn about his table-clearing technique. Nessa singing softly to Caroline while putting her down to sleep. Ivy helping by rearranging things rather than actually putting them away. The ordinary chaos of family life, which had once terrified her with its demands but now felt like the greatest privilege of her existence. This was what she'd been made for, not some grand destiny or dramatic purpose, but the daily sacred work of loving imperfect people imperfectly, of showing up again and again even when it was hard, of choosing commitment over convenience, and watching that choice compound into something beautiful over time. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Temperance and Cade sat on their porch one more time, watching stars emerge against the darkening sky. "Do you remember," Temperance said softly, "that first day I showed up? When you opened the door and saw me standing there with bread, and you looked like you'd been drowning, and I'd thrown you a rope?" Cade smiled at the memory. "I remember thinking you were either an answer to prayer or a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. Turns out you were both." Temperance laughed. "I remember being terrified. Terrified I wasn't enough, that I'd fail, that I'd make everything worse. I almost turned around 3 times before I got to your door." She turned to look at him in the starlight. "I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad I knocked. I'm so glad to let me in." Cade pulled her close, and they sat in the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need words to communicate love and commitment and satisfaction with the life they'd built. Inside, their children slept safely. The ranch Jacob had built thrived under Cade's stewardship. The household Temperance managed hummed with efficiency and warmth. And overhead, stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, indifferent to human drama, but beautiful anyway. Proof that some things endure regardless of individual struggles. This family had been forged in grief and desperation, built on warm bread and second chances, strengthened through crisis and choice, and a daily decision to keep showing up for each other. It wasn't perfect. Nothing human ever was. But it was real and true and earned through hard work and refused surrender. It was... Temperance decided as Cade kissed her temple, and they rose to go inside to their own bed and their own life. Absolutely everything she'd never known she was searching for. And it all started with warm bread and a desperate man and a knock on a door that opened onto a future neither of them had imagined, but both had built together. One day and one choice and one small act of courage at a time. And so, as the dust settles and the trail grows quiet, this chapter of the West comes to a close. Stories like this were never written to impress. They were lived by people who endured, adapted, and found meaning in unforgiving places. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to let me know. A like helps keep these stories alive, and your comments tell me which paths to ride next. Subscribe to Wild West Chronicle for more true-to-spirit frontier tales. Until next time, keep the Chronicle alive.